RPG speedruns come in many shapes and sizes, with the longest ones taking hundreds of hours to beat. While the idea of speedrunning is to beat a game as quickly as possible, it also becomes a test of will and endurance when it comes to these marathons. Something similar can be said about speedruns which are extremely short, requiring a ridiculous amount of precision to perform even if it's an RPG. Today, we're going to look at a variety of RPG speedruns that include one which takes an hour to finish, and a run that takes a whopping 337 hours to finish. However, before we look at the 1 hour run, let's check out a speedrun that beats the game in under a minute. This is Lufia 2: Rise of the Sinistrals, a turn-based RPG on the Super Nintendo and known for how buggy the Western port was when released. Normally, the game takes you through a story that requires about 20 hours to complete, but we can bypass that by exploiting some glitches in the very beginning of the game. By going into the start menu after you gain control of your character, if you select the config option and press left twice while hovering over the music, you perform something called the config glitch. This by itself doesn't do much, but if you have your status cursor set to memory, do the glitch, and leave the menu, the game is going to remember where that cursor was by keeping track of some values. One of these is a negative value thanks to the glitch, and by doing the glitch again after entering the equip menu, the game doesn't understand where your cursor should be and it instead ends up in the item menu. This corrupts your inventory, and the non-existent items located there corrupt your character's name. When you talk to another character and they say your corrupted name, the game acts like you have dialogue options, such as saying yes or no to a question. But the game doesn't just give a couple of options, it gives you a total of 128 to choose from. By running to the back of the shop and talking to the blue-haired woman Tia, you immediately get her to say your glitched name and the forbidden incantation Bevibu Air Lavho Be Myself. This gives you that massive list of options to choose from. And now these are a variety of things, namely event triggers that will activate certain cutscenes when selected, but one of these happens to be the final cutscene before the game's credits, allowing you to skip the entire game. The fastest time for this run is 51 seconds by Happy Squid 89, making it one of the fastest runs of an RPG done to this day. Runs that are this short usually are driven by the skill of the player and how fast they can menu or move through a game. Longer runs have this too, and while they may not be as glitch heavy as our last one, this next one still requires peak performance from the runner. Speaking of things that are peak, let's talk about today's sponsor, Marvel Strike Force. Marvel Strike Force is a mobile squad RPG that lets you battle with your favorite superheroes and supervillains to save the universe. With over 250 characters to select from and add to your roster, the combinations for your team to take on Marvel Strike Force's many game modes are endless. New players can even unlock up to 17 total characters within the first 30 days, including Spider-Man, Deadpool, Thor, and more. Power up your favorite characters to complete missions, unlock various resources, and take on other players in PvP modes as well. There's always something different to do, as the game is constantly evolving with new events and tournaments to keep things fresh, such as Blitz, Arena, Raids, and so many more. Download Marvel Strike Force for free right now with my link and reach level 7 to support my channel. You can scan the QR code on the screen or even use my link in the description to get started today. Thanks again to Marvel Strike Force for sponsoring this video.
Hey, you're finally awake.
Now that I'm done selling my soul for a quick buck, we can move on to our next speedrun that lasts just over an hour, which is The Elder Scrolls V: Skyrim. If you somehow don't know what Skyrim is, it's an RPG where your magic power is to scream at stuff. The run we're looking at is the All Main Quest glitchless category, which goes through the game's main storyline without the use of any glitches. The goal of this run is to defeat the dragon Alduin, and if your playthrough of the game was anything like mine, you won't be seeing this fight until like 50 hours into the game. You can cut this game down to size pretty easily, with the main strategy only needing to get to the various destinations to progress the story. In doing so, you also unlock multiple locations you can fast travel to when backtracking for other quests. Outside the horseback riding in the early game, most of the manual movement is done on foot. This is usually tedious, as running drains your stamina, which can take a bit to refill when empty. However, by using the wait mechanic to pass time, you can quickly refill your stamina and start running again almost immediately. In the overworld, this isn't that big of a deal after getting more fast travel locations, but in dungeons it's extremely useful. However, moving at the speed of sound doesn't solve another slow part of this game. Chatting with some of Skyrim's NPCs can be very slow, with the game not letting you skip some dialogue when talking to them. Thankfully, we can interrupt this in the best way possible. If you just run into the person who's talking at certain points, you can skip what they're saying and move on to their next line of text. There's more skill-oriented tricks like this one in the run, but there's also some luck involved. These are all relatively minor, such as getting a quick lockpick during the jailbreak sequence in the middle of the run, but small time losses from randomness add up in a run this short and optimized. The current record is held by Lufia with a time of 1 hour and 5 minutes for this category, and he's still working to push that time down as of this writing. The trend you'll see in RPG speedruns is that as the runs themselves get longer, more randomness or RNG gets introduced in the place of precise mechanics. This requires a different skill set than just optimal movement or fast menuing, so you need to prepare for the worst possible scenario in case something pops up, meaning quick decision making can mean the difference between losing a run and taking it all the way to the end. Skies of Arcadia Legends checks all the boxes for what I just covered, and with it being just over 10 hours long, there's plenty of opportunities for this game to screw you over. This pirate ship adventure has you pitted against the Valuan Empire, and their goal is to reawaken the Silver Gigas, a being of ultimate power that the Empire wants to use to take over the world. I won't dive too deep here, but the goal of the any% speedrun is to defeat this final boss as fast as possible. While both of the runs mentioned previously either have major glitches or quick ways to get through the story, Arcadia does not. Instead, you have to deal with the game's unrelenting randomness around every corner. One of the run's strategies to get through bosses fast is through using boxes, consumable items that have the same effects as spells you can cast. These can vary, but overall in the run, you'll see ones that damage or inflict status effects. These items can even persist through multiple uses, but that's where problems start to show up in the run. These items have a chance of breaking on use, meaning that if they break earlier than expected, it can leave runners in a bad situation money-wise and waste a ton of time. If that wasn't enough, it's also RNG to even get these in the first place. The mystery merchant that these boxes are purchased from has a 50% chance of spawning in the second town, meaning if he doesn't spawn, you have to reload from a save until he does. A couple of boxes also have a chance to drop from the first encounter, giving a chance to save some time, but these only drop at 1% chance each. While I'm on the topic of enemies, random encounters are absolutely wild in this game. Enemies can end up in weird positions in battle, and depending on the attack they use, the animation can actually waste a lot of time. These are just a few of the many things that can go wrong in this run, and while all of this is unfortunate, these are things runners can still recover from, allowing them to finish their runs. However, some encounters and bosses will straight up kill your run, and while some of this can be mitigated, there's instances where you can't do much but watch the shit show unfold.
Yo! No way.
You didn't even get a choice. You didn't even let you play the game.
Wow. That took a lot more effort than I thought it would.
While this run is extremely unforgiving, there's a lot to be said for those who run this game and others like it. The people who have mastered Skies of Arcadia Legends are nothing short of amazing. With that being said, the top any % time comes in at 10 hours, 30 minutes, and 21 seconds by Mario Nahari. Now, RPG speedruns around this length generally have a lot of luck involved when completing a run, but as these challenges take longer to complete, another barrier presents itself. The time commitment for a 10-hour run is already huge, but with some planning and a free weekend, one could make attempts happen regularly. For the rest of the runs I'm going to cover, these are usually events planned weeks, if not months in advance. These runs won't have as many points where they can die without warning, but they take their toll in a different way. The average person spends about 16 hours a day awake, so you can see how absurd it is for our next run to be 27 hours long. Dark Cloud is an action RPG where you're trying to rebuild various parts of the world after an evil entity called the Dark Genie was reawakened. Much of the gameplay takes place in dungeons which are randomly generated, but overall you see the same key item drops in specific areas in dungeons. In order to beat the game, you have to rebuild villages to a certain point by collecting sealed Atla orbs in the dungeons, defeating the dungeon bosses, and then using the Georama mechanic to put the villages together in the town areas. All of this work leads to fighting the Dark Genie at the end of the game. For the regular any percent category with no glitches, that's where the run ends. But there's a category called True 100% Glitchless that has some ridiculous requirements for completion. This game's completionist speedruns are weird, as there's two separate 100% categories. The first is what's considered the traditional 100% for the game, which requires collecting and placing all Georama, viewing all of those completion cutscenes, completing the Sun Attachment quest, and finally completing the Demon Shaft and defeating the Black Knight Pendragon. The true 100% category takes all of this and adds a few more requirements. This is a massive undertaking, especially with all the weapon evolutions. The way you evolve weapons in Dark Cloud is based off of stats and the type of weapon you start with. Every weapon has a path that eventually reaches out to its most powerful state, and these paths also branch out based on certain stat requirements. This is where weapon attachments come in handy. These items get attached to a weapon to give it more stats, and when a weapon levels up after a certain amount of use, you can choose to fuse the attachments to the weapon permanently, increasing its base stats. Once you reach a certain threshold, you'll be able to evolve your weapon into a new one that's further down the upgrade path. This process requires a ton of time and attachments, and the fastest way to get these is done by fishing. This is done to get FP, which you can exchange for the attachments you need, and that's all simple enough, but most of the grinding is done in the end game, and that's what takes a ridiculous amount of time. The weapon grinding actually makes up the last part of the run, with all the upgrades taking 10 hours to complete, and that's after some work done being in the first 17 hours in the main story in the Demon's Shaft dungeon. At the time of this writing, only one person has ever completed this category in a single sitting. Close to War holds the record with a time of 27 hours, 13 minutes, and 37 seconds. And understandably, there's not many who would want to take on a challenge like this. Thankfully, the runs that are much longer than this one all feature a runner who takes sleep breaks during their sessions. Again, these runs require a ton of planning, but not dedicating an unreasonable block of time to it means that they're honestly a bit more accessible. Digimon World 3's 100% category does exactly this, because the run itself takes almost 86 hours to complete. Digimon World 3 is an RPG that takes place in a digital reality game where the goal is to become the strongest Digimon tamer. However, an evil organization that is using Digimon to take over the world interrupts this quest, so it's up to the main character to stop them. This takes a bit of time on its own, but similar to the last 100% category we covered, the requirements for completion are absolutely overwhelming. The main thing to point out is there's a lot of grinding blended in with the main game to optimize getting experience and getting card packs from wild Digimon, which is part of why you don't see the final boss until much later in the game. The collectible aspect of the card game is immense, to say the least. There's a total of 314 cards to collect, separated out into 15 packs. The card packs are either obtained from a fishing mechanic where you get rewards from being the Digimon you fish up, or a kicking mechanic where you kick trees to fight Digimon for different card packs. Between the drops from the Digimon and what comes out of the packs that are opened, this can take forever if runners are unlucky. Each pack only contains 6 cards, and based on some data outlined in the route, some of these have chances to drop that go as low as 1 in 20 for the rarer cards. In the run performed by Toto Zigum, it took over 9 hours to get all of the cards from different packs available. Not bad all things considered, but the complete Digimon Digivolutions take a much longer effort. This took somewhere around 22 hours to finish, making up for around 31 hours of grinding for just these two requirements. Including sleep breaks, it took Toto 4 days to finish everything up, coming in with the final time of 85 hours, 59 minutes, and 9 seconds. This is the only completed run as of the time of this writing, and understandably so. Oddly enough, this was the last of multiple attempts that Toto had made for this category. His initial estimate for completing this was 500 hours, and before some routing changes he made to bring down the run to what he achieved, he had attempts reaching 230 hours and 150 hours before calling it quits. Even though he was getting sleep in the middle of these attempts, doing this many days in a row without breaks outside of that is still exhausting, both physically and mentally. That's why it's insane to me that there's RPG speedruns that go longer than this one. And 2 of these are honorable mentions, as these are challenges to beat multiple games as fast as possible. One of these is the Trio of Fate speedrun performed by Connor Cordell. Connor is already known for his runs of several 100% categories that go at least 18 hours, so he made a challenge which combines Xenogears 100%, Final Fantasy VIII 100%, and Chrono Cross 100%. He finished one recently that took a total of 95 hours over the course of several different days. Another multi-game run that was even longer than this was done by a runner named Cruel. This was a Pokemon Series 100% race that spanned 30 games and 888 different Pokemon being obtained across all of them. This clocked in at a massive 161 hours of actual playtime and 323 hours of real time that included breaks. However, these pale in comparison to the absolute monster of a game that we'll be talking about next. This is the 337-hour speedrun of Baten Kaitos, Eternal Wings in the Lost Ocean. For those who don't know about Baten Kaitos, it's a deck-building RPG where you use cards called Magnets to perform actions in battle. The goal of the game overall is to defeat the evil god Malpercio because he said the world is too wet and stole all the water from the ocean. The requirements for this 100% category are actually not that bad compared to other games we've covered so far. Getting all 1022 Magnus, 141 SP combos, and 58 music tracks are all that's required, which is due to these being the only things that activate important sub-events of the game. With all this seeming pretty simple, why does the run take over 14 days to complete? Various items in this game can evolve after enough time, and one of them is the shampoo. This needs to evolve into the splendid hair to not only obtain that Magnus, but also get the final 6 music tracks in the sound test menu. The main issue here is that the shampoo takes 336 hours to evolve into splendid hair, so runners have to keep the game going during that entire time. This isn't the only thing to keep in mind either, as the timers for evolving items are not active when you're in some type of menu. This also includes things like shop menus and getting your loot at the end of encounters. Outside of that, runners can take their time with how they progress in the game. Baten, the former world record holder, used to take a few hours a day to play and progress on stream just to make sure he could maintain his life outside the run. Funny enough, Baten has done this run several times, including an attempt where his Twitch channel was banned for 24 hours due to the game being idle for long periods of time and it violating the website's terms of service. Speaking of people who've ran the 100% category, there's a whopping 6 people who've completed it and have times on the leaderboard. The current record is held by a Japanese runner named -M with a time of 337 hours and 55 minutes. From 1 minute to 337 hours, each of these runs have their own barriers to completion. Which of these games sounds like the worst to try and get the world record in? Let me know in the comments below. And finally, thanks to those supporting me out on Patreon. It really means a lot to me. Stay hydrated, folks, and check out this cool speedrunning video the almighty YouTube algorithm is showing you.